Right now, the world is facing one of the most dangerous geopolitical crises in decades. A war involving the United States, Iran, and Israel has triggered the largest disruption to global oil trade in history. More than 10% of the world's seaborne oil supply has suddenly been cut off. At the center of it all is a narrow waterway most people have never heard of, the Strait of Hormuz. This tiny shipping corridor carries around 1/5 of the world's oil, and today, it's effectively under threat. Insurance companies are refusing to cover ships. Shipping crews are refusing to sail through it. And global energy markets are already reacting. But the real danger isn't just the oil shock, it's the war behind it. Because despite public statements suggesting the conflict could end soon, the reality is far more complicated and far more dangerous. Over the past week, the United States dramatically escalated military operations against Iran. The strikes targeted military facilities, missile capabilities, and drone infrastructure. But notably, the attacks avoided Iran's main oil export infrastructure, particularly facilities on Karg Island, responsible for exporting most of Iran's crude oil. At the same time, Washington deployed around 5,000 additional troops to the region. On the surface, the message from the White House has been simple: America is winning, Iran is weakening, and the war could end soon. But privately, many allied leaders see something different. They see a conflict that is far harder to exit than it was to enter. And that's because the goals of the war have already shifted. Initially, there were ambitious objectives including pressure for regime change in Tehran. Now, those goals appear to be quietly shrinking. Instead of overthrowing the government, the focus has shifted toward destroying missile and naval capabilities. In other words, the definition of victory is being rewritten. But even if Washington declares victory tomorrow, the conflict may still be impossible to unwind. And the biggest reason for that is the Strait of Hormuz. The United States has one major problem. It cannot fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz by force. Even the world's most powerful navy can guarantee safe shipping if Iran chooses to disrupt the waterway. The strategy Iran is using is surprisingly simple. They don't need to control the strait. They just need to make it feel dangerous enough that ships won't risk passing through. A few naval mines, small drone attacks, harassment of commercial vessels. That alone is enough to scare off shipping companies and insurers. And once that happens, the strait effectively shuts down. Iran also has several advantages. They reportedly possess thousands of naval mines and tens of thousands of drones. Even if their launch rates have dropped since the early days of the conflict, that doesn't necessarily mean they're running out. They may simply be pacing their attacks. Because to disrupt global trade, they don't need constant strikes. They just need occasional ones. Meanwhile, Iran continues exporting its own oil mainly to China, and some to India using its own tankers, which know where the mines are. That means Iran can keep earning revenue while still disrupting the global market. And this creates a powerful form of leverage, because even partial disruption of the Strait of Hormuz can push oil prices dramatically higher. But there's another major concern. The conflict could expand far beyond Iran and the United States. One possible wildcard is the Houthi movement in Yemen. For nearly 2 years, the Houthis have already been disrupting shipping through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, another critical global shipping route. Traffic there has fallen by more than 50%. If they joined this war more directly, global shipping disruptions could multiply. Another potential escalation involves regional powers. The United Arab Emirates has long disputed Iranian control of several islands in the Strait of Hormuz, including Abu Musa, Greater Tanb, and Lesser Tanb. There are growing signs the UAE could attempt to seize them during the chaos. Meanwhile, Israel has a very different outlook on the war than Washington. For Israeli leadership, the conflict with Iran is not just about deterrence. It's about eliminating a long-term existential threat. That means Israeli leaders may push for a much longer and more aggressive campaign than the United States originally intended. And that difference in strategy could create serious tension between the allies. Perhaps the gravest risk is nuclear escalation. Iran currently possesses roughly 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. That's not weapons grade, but it's close. If enriched further, it could theoretically produce around 10 nuclear warheads. For years, Iran's leadership debated whether building a nuclear weapon was worth the risk. Now, that calculation may be changing, because nuclear weapons provide the ultimate deterrent. If Iran believes its leadership is under threat of assassination or regime change, the incentive to build a nuclear weapon becomes dramatically stronger. And if that happens, the war may not truly end, even if the fighting slows down. Instead, it could evolve into a long-term shadow conflict. Similar to the tensions between Israel and Hezbollah and Lebanon, the economic consequences are already massive. More than 10% of global seaborne oil trade has been disrupted. That makes this the largest oil shock in modern history. Governments around the world are releasing oil from strategic reserves to stabilize prices, but energy is only part of the problem. The Strait of Hormuz is also a major route for key industrial materials. About 50% of global exports of urea and sulfur-critical components for fertilizer pass through this corridor. Around 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas also moves through it. That means agriculture could be the next domino to fall. Higher fertilizer prices lead to lower crop yields. Lower crop yields lead to higher food prices, and those price spikes could start appearing globally within months. Petrochemicals are another issue. Nearly all Middle Eastern exports of polyethylene used in packaging, plastics, and consumer goods also travel through the strait, which means inflation could spread into everything from clothing to cars. And because global supply chains rely on precise timing, even small disruptions can ripple across entire industries. Beyond economics, the war is reshaping geopolitics. One of the biggest questions is what it means for global deterrence. For decades, international norms discouraged certain kinds of actions like assassinating foreign leaders or striking civilian infrastructure. But those boundaries are eroding. If powerful countries ignore those norms, other countries may follow. At the same time, the war is revealing something else. Even relatively weaker states can impose serious costs on stronger ones through asymmetric tactics. Iran may not defeat the United States militarily, but by disrupting global energy markets, it can still create enormous economic and political pressure. And that lesson will be studied carefully in capitals around the world, especially in China and Russia, both of which are watching this conflict very closely. Right now, the war around the Strait of Hormuz feels a bit like the early days of the pandemic. Not because the scale is the same, but because the consequences are still unfolding. At first it looked like a regional conflict, then it became an energy crisis. Now it's turning into something much larger. A disruption to supply chains, a shift in global power, and potentially a turning point in how wars are fought. Even if the shooting stops soon, the ripple effects could last for years. Because once the world's most important oil chokepoint becomes unstable, the entire global system starts to shake. And right now, no one knows exactly how far those shockwaves will spread. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into the events shaping our world.